is day 3 of Interfaith Week, where we focused on a different religion or faith tradition each night of this Lyceum series. And we're delighted to welcome Dr. Higgins tonight with us to talk about his work in Hinduism. So Carter Higgins is an ethnographer of Hinduism in India and Nepal. He grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, and a trip to India at the age of 12 left an impression on him. And while he was studying at Wake Forest, just up the road, he dropped his double major in music and religious studies in order to focus on his newfound love for the study of South Asian religions, cultures, and language. He went on to earn a master's in Asian studies and a PhD in Asian literature, religion, and culture from Cornell University, and has spent several years living and conducting research in India and Nepal. We're delighted that you're joining us tonight, Dr. Higgins, and we're looking forward to your presentation. His presentation is entitled Deceased Saints and Fierce Deities in Popular Hinduism. So I invite you all to write down your questions and hold them to the end, and then we'll have some time to engage in a Q&A with Dr. Higgins after his presentation. So welcome, Dr. Higgins.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cobb. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. Wingate has a special place in my heart. My younger brother went to Wingate for a few years, and I really enjoyed coming down to see him. Dr. Cobb and I are friends outside of academic work. And when I was at Wake Forest, one of the professors who really encouraged me into the study of South Asian religions is now a professor at Wingate. So I have lots of fond feelings for Wingate. I should also start by apologizing for misspelling Lyceum. Lycelium, I have it written, which sounds like some kind of underground mushroom system. So, okay. So deceased saints and fierce deities in popular Hinduism. So I think this topic will explore some of the interfaith questions, as we'll see, because some of the deceased saints who are worshipped in popular Hinduism are actually Muslim saints, okay? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to start with a little bit of background on my research. And I'll use a bit of my research as a way of introducing several questions about the historical development of Hinduism. And then at the end, I'll come back and try to see if I can tie it all together. Maybe I won't be able to, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed. The research project that I conducted for my doctoral dissertation is an ethnographic study of pilgrimage to a village in northwestern India in the middle of the Thar Desert, which is a very sort of vast, sprawling desert in what is now the state of Rajasthan. This picture here, you can see that people are sort of trying to relax as best they can underneath the trees. It's very, very hot in the picture, probably upwards of 120 degrees. In the back there, you can see a brand new temple that has recently been built by the state government. And it's modeled in the style of medieval royal architecture, medieval royal warrior architecture, which itself is a kind of hybrid of Hindu and Islamic construction forms. Now, I begin with a picture of this because this is an annual celebration, okay? Once a year, people from all over northern India come to this village and they celebrate the festival of the saint named Gogaji, okay? And Gogaji is the saint that gives his name to Gogameri. So there are several ways we can think about Gogaji. First of all, he's the hero of what's called an oral epic. I'm not sure how many of you have taken a class in have taken a course in classics, but epic literature is this long and sprawling literature of the ancient world that follows all kinds of twists and turns and offers all kinds of opportunities for authors and performers to reflect philosophically, religiously, socially, politically. As I'll introduce shortly, India has two very well-known, very long classical epics. In the kind of medieval period, after Muslims started showing up in India, you had new epics being spawned about local heroes or regional heroes, some of whom combined Hindu and Islamic characteristics. So this picture here, or rather all three of these pictures here, they show some kind of what I like to think of as a devotional pluralism. In the left-hand side, there is a Muslim man who is begging for alms, charitable alms, in the name of Gogaji, and he's holding a picture of Gogaji. We'll look at this picture a little bit later, but there he's figured as a king and as a warrior and as a Hindu. So you have a Muslim man asking for charitable alms in the name of a Hindu king. In the middle here, you have a tomb that is in the village, and it's a tomb of another saint, of an ascetic named Ratanath, or Baba Ratan, whose name roughly translates to the jeweled ascetic. He was a renouncer. He renounced the world and focused on meditation. Some stories say that he was Arab, that he had come to India, was an Arab Muslim who practiced Hindu yoga. Some say that he was a Hindu yogi who traveled to the Middle East to perform the Islamic pilgrimage and had a conversion experience. So this is one of his tombs that he has. There are several tombs that claim to be the tomb of his body. And then in the right-hand side, that is an image of the tomb of Gogaji. Okay, so Gogaji his body is entombed. Now, the thing to note about this is that in Hinduism, the bodies of deceased people are cremated. And in India, burial is largely reserved for Muslims and for Hindu ascetics. Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this term ascetic, but ascetic means someone who gives up their place in society, who gives up their property ownership, who give up family, who become celibate. It's similar to monks and nuns. An ascetic is similar to monks and nuns, except that there is more of an emphasis on renouncing all of the pleasures. And Hindu ascetics become figures of great reverence. I'll skip ahead and show you a picture just of some living ascetics. We can come back to that. But when a Hindu ascetic gives up his or her place in society, he or she also gives up the ability to be cremated in an ancestral funeral. So Hindu ascetics are buried. Now Gogaji, the saint who is the focus of my research, he's buried like a Muslim. So all the people waiting in line to go into his mausoleum are Hindu. So these three images show three ways that Hindu and Islamic styles can be brought together in popular Hinduism. Okay, so in the village of Gogameri where I work, there's another site. Okay, there are two ritual sites, two pilgrimage destinations where pilgrims go to worship. The other is this, in the top right corner, is this monastery, this monastic temple that's on top of a hill. It's dedicated to the memory of a medieval yogi named Gorakhnath, who is said to have been the teacher of Gogaji, the warrior saint. And all around you see people offering fire sacrifices to his memory, and asking him usually to help them in their lives. So at least in Gogameri, People worship this saint both with an image, which is characteristically Hindu. Hindus like to worship their deities with images and statues and paintings and beautiful artwork, whereas Muslims prefer not to have images created at all of any divine or saintly figure. And they also can tend to be very suspicious about reverence for saintly people. So it could be, let's see in a bit, it could be that these fire sacrifices are an aniconic form of worship that may be responding to some Islamic devotional currents. So these are the two sites, okay? These are the two sites of worship in Gogameri. On the one hand, there's this tomb structure. On the other hand, there is this monastic temple. So once a year, when people come to this large festival, very large religious gathering, one of the things that they like to do is they like to meet with modern day ascetics and gurus. These men here, these three men here, are both ascetics and gurus. They are men who have renounced the world, who remain celibate, who take vows of poverty and chastity, just like a Catholic monk or nun or priest would do. And they devote themselves to meditation, to practices of yoga, and to sort of the cultivation of their spirituality. This man right here is a guru. He is not ascetic, he's a married man. And he is a Hindu who has sort of styled himself as a Muslim mystic, a man who commits himself to sort of exploring ways that he can have some sorts of experience that are sort of in closer proximity to God than human life tends to allow. Okay, so what all three of these men share in common is a strict practice of denial, self-denial, okay, renunciation, trying to control one's appetite, trying to control one's desires, and so on and so forth. These practices of asceticism and renunciation, however, are not only intended for religious specialists like these ascetics and gurus. When people go on pilgrimage to Gogameri and to other religious festivals in popular Hinduism, they also practice austerities, just not full-time, okay? So most pilgrims are not ascetics, they are not gurus, they are, regular people. Most of them tend to be sort of working class families in Gogameri. And once a year, they take this long pilgrimage journey. While they're traveling and before they have performed their worship, they make a number of vows to behave quite strictly with themselves in the same way or in a similar way that an ascetic would. So pilgrims will remain celibate. If they are not already vegetarians, they will remain vegetarian for the duration of their pilgrimage. They may limit their diets in one way or the other. They may try to, at least en route to the destination, they may try to only sleep on the ground, to deny themselves of the comfort of sleeping in the bed. So all kinds of these. In part, they do it as a way of proving their devotion to the deity, proving their commitment to the two saints. And in part, they are, experimenting with the disciplines of, the self-disciplining that belongs more properly to the life of an ascetic or a guru. So in addition to lay austerities, what else do pilgrims do in Gogameri during this annual festival? Well, something that they do is they perform a lot of charity or service, a term in Hindi, in Hindi and the local dialects that are spoken around Gogameri is called sewa. And here you see in the first picture and in the first picture on the left and in the last picture on the right, you see local residents who are serving free food and water to long distance travelers. So people are traveling long distances. Again, these are largely working class people. So they give them free food, they give them water, out of recognition of the hardships that they have taken on, and also to perform some kind of religiously inspired charitable services themselves in the name of the deities and the saints. In the middle picture here, you have a practice that has been particularly influenced by Sikhism, which is another Indian religion, a smaller Indian religion that also sort of draws on very important streams in Hinduism and in Islam, but has become its own religious tradition. And one of their practices, it aims at creating a kind of egalitarian ritual environment. Indian societies, South Asia, are known for having prominent or visible forms of inequality or stratification of society. And one way that Sikhs and some types of Hindus and some types of Muslims try to break down those barriers at the time of worship is by encouraging everyone to eat together and by encouraging everyone who has eaten to serve food to people who have not yet eaten. Purity and impurity taboos in terms of food, water, touching, and things like that are very important to what's known as the caste system. And in this way, people are sort of knowingly breaking the caste system in the context of pilgrimage and worship. So in addition to performing lay austerities, in addition to performing worship, in addition to making these long journeys, pilgrims are also performing some type of charity or service in the name of these saintly deceased saints. Something else that is very important in Gogamedi and in other forms of popular Hinduism is an aspect of fun in the process of worship. This took me a while to wrap my head around because I, as Dr. Cobb said in the introductions, I'm from North Carolina. I'm from an especially waspy Protestant environment. My mom likes to say that our family comes from the only types of Christians in the world that can say hallelujah and seem like they're bored to death or unenthusiastic. So to my mind, folks who are in the right-hand picture, sort of dancing with joy, playing drums, singing. In the left, people are sort of dancing in the front, while people in the back are being sort of wallflowers. But these are people who are reveling in the story of the deceased saints, who are sort of asking the deceased saints for blessings, and they're doing so in a way that has a lot of pleasures to offer by way of music, dancing, so on and so forth. However, it's not only in the process of worshiping that these types of practices of popular Hinduism are devoted to some type of fun. In the top left corner, you'll see a carnival ride. Carnival rides are a ubiquitous part of the landscape at these types of celebrations. In the biggest picture, you see an acrobat, someone who is from a nomadic acrobatic community that goes from celebration of popular Hinduism to celebration of popular Hinduism all across northern India, performing for crowds of worshipers. When that picture was taken, she will eventually bend down and then sort of slink herself over entirely. In the bottom right corner, which is a particularly lovely picture that my father-in-law took, is pilgrims shopping. And it's shopping for things that they don't need. It's shopping for things that look nice, that are kind of, not of particularly high quality, but that catch their eye. So if before one worships on pilgrimage, one should deny oneself pleasures and indulgences, after one worships, one actually should sort of release money out into the world. All right, so consumption, frivolous purchases is the name of the game. Okay. The last thing to mention about the celebration in Gogamedi, and then I'll sort of ask what any of this has to do with the history of Hinduism, is that the pilgrimage festival, the month-long pilgrimage festival at the end of the summer in Gogamedi, doubles as a livestock festival. Okay, so if half of the people who are there come to this village in the desert in order to worship these two deceased saints. The other half come to sell their camels and their ox and their water buffalo, or to trade in some sort of large capacity of animals. This festival in particular, and the area of India in the desert, has a long tradition of having these periodic markets or fairs, and the people who sort of inhabited the desert were nomadic up until the 19th century. The desert did not offer any stable environment for agriculture, so a drought might make you move tomorrow, a hailstorm might make you move a day after that. So people got together once a month or once a year or once a season to worship these deities who protected them, these sort of, fierce warrior goddesses, these saints who were remembered for particularly heroic actions or particularly fierce forms of asceticism, and also to have fun together, to play music, to listen to music, to commemorate the ancestors, and to redistribute the goods of that nomadic society, which were sort of, animals and a few pockets of vegetables. Okay, so that gives you an overview of the popular Hindu celebration that I'm writing about in this village called Kogamiri. What I want to do now is I want to use it to pose a series of questions. And then in trying to answer those questions, I will introduce you to the history of Hinduism. My primary question today is, how does this worship of saintly dead, which has many overlaps with the worship of what are called fierce deities, how does this form of worship and celebration help us to understand so-called popular Hinduism? How does it help us to understand popular Hinduism historically? And how does it help us to understand popular Hinduism today? Secondly, and sort of less importantly, why does popular Hindu worship sometimes include commerce and festivals? Shouldn't these be kept separate? Shouldn't religion and money be kept separate? Isn't that the breeding grounds of corruption? In order to answer this question, especially the first one, but also the second one, I'm going to rewind a bit, okay? The first thing I'm going to do when I rewind a bit is I'm going to introduce what I mean when I say South Asia and India, okay? Not sure how many of you are familiar with these terms, but India is the name of a modern nation state that was created in 1947. It's the big one there. South Asia is a designation that the CIA actually came up with when they were trying to figure out how to deal with the world during the Cold War period. And the term South Asia refers basically to what we call the Indian subcontinent. The Indian subcontinent includes all of what is now India, all of what is now Pakistan, all of what is now Nepal, all of what is now Bangladesh, as well as all of what is now Sri Lanka, as well as some parts of Afghanistan and some parts of Bhutan. Okay. The Indian subcontinent is noted for its incredible diversity, this incredible ethnic diversity, incredible linguistic diversity, incredible religious diversity. Okay, so when we talk about Hinduism, what do we mean? What do we mean by the Hinduism? Well, first off, let me say, since we're on the topic of diversity, Hinduism also has an incredible diversity. To some, it seems hard to find a sort of unifying theme. One of the reasons for that is that Indian civilization seems to lack some of the centralizing impulses of Western Europe. And we in American society today have inherited some of those centralizing impulses. Okay, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is there should be one, the idea that there should be one central government, that there should be one central religion, that there should be one central language, that there should be one central culture. All of these ideas, even though they're not very seemingly in today's society, they have been very important in the historical development of Western European society, which has provided the contemporary United States with many of its cultural traditions. So in India, at any one time, there were all kinds of kingdoms. Okay, there are all kinds of languages still spoken. There are 19 officially recognized languages in India. And a saying that people like to say is that even when you have a single language, for example, Bengali, if you go from one village to the next, then you have a different type of Bengali being spoken. And South Asians seem, for most of their history, to have been very happy about this. They seem to have kind of reveled in multiplicity, in complexity, and in a kind of, we could say a polycentrism. It was okay that there were multiple centers of culture, of religion, of politics, of divinity. What we now call Hinduism has a very, 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 very long history, dating perhaps even to the 18th century BCE. That is around 1700 years before the Christian era starts with Jesus Christ. However, the name Hinduism is a modern term, and let me explain a little bit about its etymology. Some of you may recognize that ISM at the end, Hinduism. It looks like Buddhism. It looks like nationalism. It's an English suffix. So ism, half the word Hinduism comes from English. The other half, Hindu, is Persian. And Persians, as you can see here, I'm encircling Iran. Iran corresponds largely to the historical area called Persia. Iran's referred to people who lived around this area as Hindu. Okay, and Hindu was a geographical region for people who lived east of this river basin. Okay, in South Asia itself, in the Indian subcontinent itself, that was called Sapta Sindhu. Sindhu meaning river, okay, or ocean. And so the term Hindu meant people who lived beyond this area. The Greeks, okay, so the Persians basically changed the S of Sindhu into an H, okay, from Sindhu to Hindu. The Greeks, when they came, they dropped the S and the H entirely, and they called it Indu. And Indu is where we get the name India from the Greeks. So Hinduism refers essentially to the indigenous, what do we want to say? The indigenous religions of South Asia that are not Buddhism, that are not Jainism, that are not Sikhism. Although how we can put those together is a very challenging question that I'll try to address. Okay, one way to put them together is to tell the historical story, okay? To tell a historical story about this thing we call Hinduism. That dates very, very long time ago. Essentially, in known history, it dates to what we call the Vedic period. The Vedic period, which was when a group of people who were speaking what we call Sanskrit, the language Sanskrit, migrated into South Asia from somewhere around the Dead Sea. This language Sanskrit was an Indo-European term. That means that historically it was connected to ancient Greek, ancient Latin, to modern day English, and so on and so forth. So these people migrated into India, where they started to very, very slowly mix with the people of South Asia, the indigenous people. In the top left corner, you see an older civilization. We have archaeological evidence from there, but we can't understand it because we don't know the language that they used. In the right, in the picture to the right, you see the routes that these Sanskrit speakers came in order to when they migrated into India. The type of religion that they brought with them focused on these fire sacrifices. Okay, I don't know if anybody remembers these, these hearths or these fire altars, but I showed you a picture of them in Gogameri. So from 1750 BCE until today, fire sacrifice has been an important part of religious practices in India. The fire sacrifices that were practiced in ancient India were they required the chanting of these sacred verses. And the sacred verses were called the Vedas, which literally means knowledge. As the people who practiced Vedic religion and who spoke Sanskrit moved further and further eastward, they eventually discovered a way to forge iron, which allowed them to clear forests and establish a new urban civilization. So in the context of the urban civilization that grew up around this Ganga, or this Ganges River, you have a whole new complex development on the Vedic sacrifice. Some ascetics, remember we're talking about ascetics who are renouncers, who remain celibate, who give up the world and their place in it to become meditators and practitioners of yoga. Some of them rejected the whole Vedic system entirely. The most notable ascetic who rejected the Vedic system entirely, what we now call the Buddha, okay, who was the sort of the first renouncer we know historically sort of set the path for Buddhism. In conversation, as well as in arguing with the Buddhists and with other people who had different opinions about the Vedic religious system, the predecessors to Hindus developed these new concepts that became very important to Hinduism, but also to Buddhism and Jainism and other traditions. One of these is reincarnation. All right, so this is the moment when the idea of reincarnation is first articulated, the idea of karma, the idea that the course of your reincarnation is determined by the moral consequences of your action, and then the idea of what Hindus tend to call moksha or mukti, which is liberation from the painful cycle of reincarnation. Okay, which could be compared to the Buddhist notion of nirvana or enlightenment. Okay, so this period is really a kind of the philosophical concepts that remain important throughout the history of Hinduism are fashioned at this point in time in Sanskrit, in the elite tradition. The elite tradition continues in what is known as the period of classical Brahmanism. And at this point, it becomes possible to talk about a Brahmanical tradition, since the word Hindu wouldn't have been invented. And the Brahmanical refers to the class of scholars and priests who are composing these really brilliant, sophisticated texts. So just like in the previous period, you had these new ideas of reincarnation, of karma, and of liberation from the consequences of karma. Now you have a number of new very, very important terms and new texts and new types of practices. One concept that's elaborated at this stage can actually help us try to figure out what it is that sort of unifies Hinduism. One way of understanding the unification of Hinduism is by means of the centrality of this term dharma. Dharma has sort of two overlapping meanings. One is duty. So it is my duty to do X, Y, and Z. It is my moral duty to respect my parents. It is my ritual duty to pray to this deity, so on and so forth. It also means order, as in social order, as in how is society organized? And relatedly, how is the universe organized? So the universe is properly ordered and properly organized when everyone obeys, when everyone follows their own dharma, okay, their own duties. These duties are not at all the same. So if I'm from the upper class and I'm a man and I am in my 30s or 40s, then my duty will look very differently from a 19-year-old woman who is from the working classes. So we're not at all expected to do the same things, but we are all expected to do our duty as it's defined according to context. And it is our doing of our own duties that leads to order on both a social and a macro scale. This is also the point in time where dharma becomes one of the central terms for these epics that I mentioned earlier. There are two classical epics that are entirely significant for the development of Hinduism. One is called the Mahabharata, which is about a great war between these two sets of cousins. The other is called the Ramayana, which is about the quest of a god king to go retrieve his goddess wife who has been kidnapped by a demon, and then ultimately he wants to restore order, dharma, in the kingdom and in the cosmos. A third term that's extremely important that first appears at this point but takes some time to develop is bhakti, which is devotion. Okay, devotion sounds like it refers to a religious feeling in your heart, but really what it refers to is this strong relationship, this strong interpersonal relationship that a person has with a particular deity. Okay, and so it's an emotional bond, but it's also a kind of abiding, a personal relationship that the human worshiper has with the deity. This is also the period where you get Hinduism, what's called temple Hinduism. And temple Hinduism, essentially sort of grounded kingdoms. Okay, so you had kingdoms that had these massive temples, and the massive temples were dedicated to a single deity in particular. All right. So Hinduism is often called polytheism, but in fact, the practice of temple Hinduism in this period and the practice of bhakti at this period was more or less monotheistic. It's sort of monotheistic in the Old Testament sense. Not that there only one God exists, but that you should only be devoted to one God. And this would center a particular kingdom. Okay, so in the post-classical era, you have the development of these two new, not individual traditions, but types of tradition. One is bhakti, as I was just explaining, devotion. Devotion becomes tied to local practice, to vernacular practice. So rather than writing in Sanskrit, which is the language of the elite that was brought to South Asia such a long time ago, people start composing these hymns, these poems to the gods in their sort of mother tongue, in their vernacular tongue. This starts in South India. It's kind of critical of Brahmanical society. It moves, over the course of centuries, it moves northwards and settles among a number of saints in central India. And then finally, it moves up to the north, where there's another proliferation of saints. So in each case, you have a proliferation of saints who were sort of especially devoted and wrote these especially moving emotional hymns describing their devotion for the gods. The other type of tradition that emerged here is called Tantra, which is basically an esoteric tradition that depends less on devotion than it does on a type of self-cultivation. You are using yoga, you are using certain secret forms of worship in order basically to come to identify yourself with the god or goddess to whom you are committed. And this, partakes of a much older philosophy that sort of saw all of the universe composed of one sort of underlying divine substance. Around this period, the Muslims showed up. They come in primarily in three ways. First, you have Arab merchants coming along the coast. Secondly, you have Turco-Persian armies and traders coming this way from Iran through what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan, settling in the north first and then in the south. And finally, you have entrepreneurial, enterprising, holy men who come and they help to settle and civilize these areas, what are now Bangladesh and Pakistan, which had been jungles. And these new enterprising Muslim holy men come, cut down the trees, help people build villages, help people learn to cultivate rice or wheat, and establish these local societies. So at this point, these local societies here in the far east of the Indian subcontinent and the far west were not integrated into Brahmanical society, meaning the forms of religion and the forms of sociality that they practiced were not as influenced by the sort of Brahmanical forms of Hinduism that came before. Instead, they practiced devotion to these local goddesses. So these local goddesses or these local deities who were kind of, fierce, meaning they were sort of associated with battle, with defense. They were sort of close to the ground. They participated in human society. If you ignored them, they would retaliate. But if you made them happy, then they would help you out in life. So what happened after these Sufi saints passed on, died, their tombs became the center of a form of collective remembrance that involved veneration. So people were sort of loyal to these Muslim holy men who had helped them establish a local society. And over the course of about 300 or 400 years, people became more and more devoted to these saints. These saints became more and more to be seen as sort of, possessing some type of miraculous capacity, some way of intervening with Allah or with God, and with sort of helping people out in life from the other side of the grave. So in one way, the sort of village deities or the sort of quote unquote tribal deities that preceded this period among the communities who were not integrated into Brahmanical society, in some way, the role that their deities had played were taken over by these Muslim holy men. Okay, and all of this is eventually going to provide some context for returning to Gogamiti. A last point is the development of these regional martial oral epics. In the period after there's real kind of sustained Muslim presence in North India, you get a whole range of these new local epics about local heroes who died protecting cattle against thieves, who died protecting the village against marauders, in some cases who died fighting against Islamic armies that were coming into India. In some cases, they were themselves Muslim and died sort of protecting the faithful from people who wanted to manipulate or harm them. And you get all of these new sort of locally focused or regionally focused epics that don't have such far purchase. If you look on the left here, that's a picture of Gogaji, the main saint in Gogamiti, and he's astride his horse. There have the ascetic Goraknath, who's the other main saint in Gogamiti. That's him in the top left corner. And all up above, you have the major Hindu deities. The major Hindu deities up top, and then the sort of Islamic-looking tomb down at the bottom. Okay, this image represents an effort that you see to sort of shift things from popular Hinduism into a sort of more mainstream engagement with Brahmanical Hinduism, and you see this more and more these days. Okay, but I don't think I actually have enough time to talk about that. But essentially, it has to do with the history of how Hindu intellectuals responded to the ways that the British colonial government and their scholars tended to disparage Hinduism. You have sort of missionaries, British Orientalists, European Orientalists and British colonial officials starting to make a new definition of Hinduism once they get there to take over India. Here's a picture of the land that they controlled in pink. And they do not think very highly of it. So quite naturally, you have Hindu intellectuals speaking back, borrowing the term Hinduism, and hoping to sort of change how Hindus engage with their traditions. Fast forward, 100 years or so, and you get the nationalist movement, the anti-colonial nationalist movement, where Mahatma Gandhi on the left here most famously sort of led the resistance to British colonialism. Eventually, the British decided that they would split British India into Hindu parts that would be called India and Muslim parts that would be called Pakistan and later Bangladesh. And the picture on the right here is this traumatic period on the eve of Indian independence, on the eve of Pakistani independence. You have, about millions of people sort of moving from the area that they used to live in to a new area, and there was sort of clashes and heartbreaking sort of violence. Now, since the 1980s, you have in India, at least, you have this sort of you have a resurgence of people saying that India should really only be Hindu, that it's really, India should be defined by Hinduism, and not defined by religious pluralism and so on and so forth. And this type of argument is reflected in the new temple that's been built around the Gogamiti tomb, Gogaji's tomb. This is Gogaji's tomb down here, the warrior saint's tomb, which is built in the style of a Sufi's tomb. This is the tomb itself. And here the government has sort of built this Hindu warrior-looking facade around it in order to hide the Islamic inheritance. So that brings you to a sort of politicization of popular Hinduism by saying popular Hinduism shouldn't be independent and mixing with other forms of practice. Instead, it should be sort of more readily identifiable with what the politicians think proper Hinduism should be. To my mind, we can think about the Gogamiti pilgrimage in terms of this continuity of sacrifice, of aniconic worship, of image worship, of epics, of the role of ascetics in householder society, in the kind of attraction that temples have played, in the cultivation of these relationships of devotion with deities, with forms of self-cultivation that are more or less esoteric, as well as with a kind of pluralistic interaction with vernacular Islam and Sikhism. So that, according to at least my account, is one way of telling the story of Hinduism from the perspective of the Gogamiti pilgrimage.
Thank you so much. Very good. I think we all learned a lot. I want to give some opportunities for the students to ask any questions of Dr. Higgins. We have a few minutes left of the Lyceum. So students, you can do that in a couple of ways. One, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly. Or two, you can use the chat and write out a question. Or three, if you're uncomfortable sharing with everyone your question, you can direct message me with your question, and then I can ask Dr. Higgins that question. So I'm going to start just to give everybody a bit of time to get started. And I want to ask Dr. Higgins, do you see if you can expand a little bit on how food is involved in some of these practices that you talked about? We're starting a new class in the fall that's called Food and Faith. And I don't know if any of the students in here are registered for it, but I think that showed up in a number of your pictures, especially. And so I wonder if you might expand on that a little.
Thanks, that's a great question. And it sounds like it's going to be a fantastic course also. Food and faith sounds like a very engaging way to approach religion, because it incorporates concerns about the body, about community boundaries, and so on and so forth. So food I would say, is an important part of several aspects of the story I told. Maybe, the first thing to mention is that in this relationship of bhakti or devotion, the human devotee sort of engages in what look to be like intimate human relationships with the deity, either with the image of the deity, or if it's an aniconic deity with some sort of non-anthropomorphic representation. So if I am devoted to Gogaji and I have a sort of a statue of Gogaji, I will wake him up in the morning, I will bathe him in the morning, I will clothe him in the morning, and I will feed him in the morning. I will give him lunch in the daytime, as well as sing songs to him, show him adoration, repeat at night, and then put him to bed. So one of the reasons why this is so important is that the exchange of internal substance is of high value to South Asian ways of living and thinking. The idea, remember I mentioned dharma, which is duty or order, that's linked to the context in which you live. So your duty is linked to the class you come from, okay? In the classical period, there were theories of 4 classes. The intellectuals, the warriors, rulers, soldiers were second, the sort of merchants, farmers, and overall producers were third, and then the sort of service industry servants were last. Not, sort of totally excluding the indigenous people who later came to be called untouchables. So the class that I belong to will determine what I can eat, what I cannot eat. Some people are vegetarian, for Brahmins in particular. For the rulers and the soldiers and the warriors, it's obligatory that they should that they should eat meat. So the sorts of deities that you have attached to your class or to your caste tend to have the same food taboos. So the fierce deities that I mentioned in the title, they belong to both popular Hinduism in the sense of widespread Hinduism, and in the sense of popular Hinduism as the Hinduism of the lower classes and castes, the non-elite. The difference being that an upper class or upper caste person would not offer impure food to the fierce deity, whereas sort of many lower class communities and many lower caste communities offer animal sacrifices, liquor, opium, tobacco, so on and so forth to the goddess or the god, who is especially fierce, right? Who is sort of lives close to the earth and is sort of fierce enough warrior to be able to defeat the demons that are causing trouble in the universe or in your life.
Thank you. You said liquor and opium too. That's so interesting.
Yes. It's highly regulated these days. This is another, sort of at least 100, 200 year long process of sort of trying to make popular Hinduism seem more elite, to seem more sort of, to create more overlaps with the kind of erudite, scholarly, pan-South Asian tradition of Hinduism. So leather products aren't allowed in temples. You have to wear a sort of non-leather belt or take your belt off if you want to go. There was a time sort of in the colonial period where the meat sacrifices were sort of transferred outside of the temple but still performed. These days they have been made illegal in some, in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Alex has a question. If you want to unmute yourself, Alex.
Yeah, it kind of also had to do with food. So I was raised Catholic, so we have Lent. And I know Muslims have Ramadan. So I was just kind of wondering, is there anything specific that there is in like Hinduism, and like could you go and like, if you haven't already go into a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a good job on your part, noting the sort of comparative aspect of Ramzan and Lent, both of which have just ended, right? Correct?
Yeah, I think. Well, I know Lent has. I'm not sure about Ramadan.
Okay, I think it's close if it hasn't already ended. So the term that they use in most parts of India is called vrat, and a vrat. One way of saying that is a fast. So, for example, remember I talked about these devotional relationships, these sort of more or less monotheistic devotional relationships. Say I am a sort of a middle-class housewife who is devoted to Ganesha, who is the deity who has sort of what looks to be like an elephant head. So he has a particular day of the week, just like all of the major deities have particular days of the week. So if I'm particularly devoted to him, then I would fast that day of the week for now and forever. In addition to that, fasting is, I should have started by saying fasting is especially prominent among women. In addition to that, there are seasons of the year when fasting is more prominent or more common among both men and women. There is a well-known fall festival when women fast, and they fast in the hopes that one of the major universal sort of monotheistic deities will bless their husbands and the men in their life. Yeah, so especially devoted men would do the same, would fast from time to time. But I think to add to your comparative perspective, I would say I didn't mention fasting, but I did mention this giving up, this renouncing of pleasures, both as a way of sort of denying yourself something to train yourself, and as a way of emulating the monks and nuns and the ascetics. So I would say that, at least the way that I teach it in my undergraduate course, is that there's a similar dynamic of giving up, which is the same thing you're doing. And when you offer a sacrifice or you give food to a deity, you're giving something important to you to the deity, or you're just getting rid of it for a time being. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. One came to me in the chat, which is a pretty broad question. What do you think is a common misconception about Hinduism?
A common misconception about Hinduism? Oh, there's so many.
It's a good question.
Too many to count. I would say, for example, if the answer would very much depend on who you asked. Okay, some Hindus absolutely reject the notion that Hinduism is polytheistic. And there are good philosophical reasons in the history of Hinduism for suggesting so. Other people would disagree, and they would present equally, valid, historically valid arguments. I think I would say that the thing that's misunderstood most about Hinduism is its historical sophistication, its artistic sophistication, its emotional sophistication, its aesthetic sophistication, in its long-term civilizational development. It's not, it's hard to think of it as a religion. This is a separate question, because the term religion is such a poor term for anything that's called a religion. For Christianity, Judaism, the term does not encompass the civilizational techniques that are involved in Jewish communities just as much as Hindu communities. So the way the way kingdoms were set up, the way politics was practiced, the way the economy was organized, the way businesses were practiced, all of these had some real moral, religious, ethical, philosophical relationship to what we call the Hindu religion. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah.
Thank you. Zachariah, you have your hand up, I think.
Yes, I was wondering, since there's different deities for social class levels, what would happen if someone were to fall to a lower one? Would they change deity, or would it be like a karma thing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, yes, I think that there are cases where that happens. I'll give you two examples, or maybe two or three. So Gogaji, the warrior hero saint that I introduced, that I study, he had for a long time he was associated with very low status groups of people. Okay, at first they were nomads, desert dwellers, people with goat herds, or performers, and so on and so forth, who were not integrated into what we now call caste. So later, when they became integrated into what we call caste and what we call sort of, Orthodox Hindu society, they became seen as low status. Okay, so the pilgrimage that I'm writing about, if you ask people today, if you ask an upper class person or an upper caste person if they go to this pilgrimage, Most of them will say no. Most of them will say no, we would never go to something like that. However, these fierce deities and these saintly dead, they offer miracles to people. They intervene in people's lives, including in the lives of people who are wealthy or higher status. And then those higher status people become devoted to them. And in fact, a book that I am sort of in the process of writing is about what happens when those upper status people become the most prominent voices among the devotees in general. Okay, another example, I will say there's a book that I quoted without quoting today. It's called Fierce Gods. It's by an anthropologist named Diane Mines. And it opens with these low status people, these, untouchability is now illegal in India, but they're ex-untouchables, where they said, we are going to go into the upper caste temple, okay? Because the government of India said it is illegal to bar them from doing so. But it's in this very small knit community where it created this whole uproar, okay? It turned the village upside down. So in a small, in a small village, it would do a lot of social, it would cause a lot of social agitation for people to be moving upwards or downwards in terms of their worship practices. Whereas in the city, it's more common. And I think a lot of the people that I write about, at least, who are sort of wealthy, educated, upper caste people worshiping this historically lower status deity, they are from the city, where caste and has broken down to a certain degree in some places. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
That was a great question. Thank you so much. We've hit 8 o'clock, so we'll stop now. And if anyone has other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat too. But thank you so much for your time, Dr. Higgins. And we are just so grateful that you shared with us your knowledge about Hinduism and the connections between Islam as well. And Kia or Alex, if you'd like to finish up the Lyceum requirements, we will end the evening.
Definitely. And on behalf of Lyceum, thank you, Dr. Higgins, for sharing as well during this presentation. Very insightful, a lot to consume. And I think that it's very interesting that casting system has evolved with time, and to see where it goes as we continue to progress within society. So we do appreciate you greatly and hope to have you back again. And at this time, you're welcome. At this time, guys, Alex will drop the form link in the chat she just did. She is probably going to stay on for another 5 minutes. So please be mindful. Go ahead and click the link and fill out your form. Make sure your form is complete. Make sure you have access to the link before you exit the presentation, or you will not receive credit for this particular Lyceum, okay? We thank you guys for your kindness and your reflection, and I hope you all have a great evening.